When completing my final practicum, I was required to collect ongoing evidence of student learning, which would be included within my GTPA. When exploring opportunities to collect this evidence, I became aware of gaps in my understanding relating to the use of assessment for learning. Prior to this practicum, I had implemented formative assessment for the sole purpose of providing students with individual feedback. I had not explored how assessment for learning could be utilised to inform my own planning or approach to teaching. This oversight was addressed during my final practicum, where I began analysing the links between student performance and my teaching practice. I would analyse student responses to identify gaps in their understanding relating to key areas of learning. This information would then be used during the planning of future learning sequences, as well as informing strategies for differentiation and scaffolding. Despite my efforts, an issue emerged surrounding the design of these assessment tasks. I began considering whether the way in which questions had been framed within the assessment task were supportive in generating student responses which could be utilised as data or evidence to inform future teaching. The design of meaningful assessment tasks was a matter of which I required further learning. I intend to focus on developing my ability to plan and orchestrate meaningful assessment to support student learning and to inform my teaching practice. This aligns with the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, Professional Practice Standard 5, Assess, Provide Feedback and Report on Student Learning. Attention will be directed towards the development of Substandard 5.1, Assess Student Learning. At a graduate level, I must demonstrate an understanding of assessment strategies, including informal and formal, diagnostic, formative and summative approaches to assess student learning. Referring to the Alice Springs Education Declaration, there are 3 purposes for conducting assessment: for learning, as learning, and of learning. Assessment for learning enables teachers to use information about student progress to inform their teaching, while assessment as learning allows for students to reflect on and monitor their own progress and inform their future learning goals. Diagnostic and formative assessment tasks can be utilised for both purposes. Assessment of learning is to assess students' achievements against recognised goals and standards. This usually occurs at the end of a learning sequence in the form of a formal, summative assessment task. Considering the area of assessment design in which I currently require professional development, I will be focusing my attention on assessment for learning. Substandard 5.4, Interpret Student Data, will also be explored. At a graduate level, teachers must demonstrate the capacity to interpret student assessment data to evaluate student learning and modify teaching practice. Focusing on Substandards 5.1 and 5.4, I will explore how to design meaningful assessment and how to utilise student responses to inform my teaching practice. To begin my professional development surrounding assessment design and practice, I accessed the university library to explore relevant academic literature related to the topics of formative assessment and assessment for learning. Although these terms are often considered interchangeable, it is important to note that not all formative assessment should be considered as an effective means of conducting assessment for learning. In my research, key acronyms emerged: ARG, Assessment Reform Group, AfL, Assessment for Learning, and SRL, Self-Regulated Learning. Reviewing literature for this topic, I discovered that the majority of Australian-based research into AfL was focused on its application in a primary school setting. I had to explore international research to expand this context to include the secondary years of schooling. From this search, I discovered Levault and AfL's book titled Assessment for Learning, Meeting the Challenges of Implementation. In this book, they stress the link between AfL and the development of self-regulation amongst learners. Although I hadn't originally planned on investigating this relationship when undertaking my literature review, I discovered that discussions surrounding self-regulation were prominent across all literature related to AfL. As emphasised by Levault and AfL, to be effective, AfL must attend to 4 areas of regulation. This includes student goal setting, monitoring of progress towards set goals, interpretation of feedback, and adjustment of goal-directed action. Teachers must always consider the development of self-regulation when planning AfL. Furthermore, AfL is optimised when embedded within instructional activities, which are designed to ensure interactive regulation of student learning. When constructing an assessment task, Levault and AfL outlined the 3 main dimensions of learning which must be considered. This includes depth of learning, where level of complexity is increased with each new activity. Autonomy of learning, where teacher guidance is gradually removed as students complete new tasks. And transfer of learning, where students must apply their learning to different contexts in order to demonstrate generalization. Levault and AfL even go as far as to argue that any assessment task can be used for formative purposes if the evidence collected is used to make instructional adjustments. To better understand the qualities of effective AfL, I viewed Heather Faring's Understanding Assessment Practice to Improve Students' Literacy Learning. Although this text is targeted towards primary school teachers, many of the strategies discussed within these chapters can be universally applied across the P-12 curriculum. When reading this text, I focus mainly on Chapter 2, Assessment for Learning in Practice and Applicability for Diverse Students, and Chapter 3, A Toolkit for Developing Assessment in English, a Queensland focus. In Chapter 2, Cummings and Cleage discuss the 10 research-based principles of formative assessment, as originally outlined by ARG. Under these 10 principles, formative assessment focuses on how students learn and remains central to classroom practice. When successfully implemented, AfL will benefit both the teacher and the learner. Meaningful use of AfL will foster motivation among students, prompting an understanding of learning goals and criteria. This will develop the learner's capacity for self-assessment, leading to a greater sense of learner autonomy. Moving on to Chapter 3, Hollis explores the design elements of effective assessment. Whilst explored within the subject of English, these design elements can be applied across all curriculum areas. Hollis emphasises the importance of designing assessment which has a meaningful context that engages students, linking to matters which are both relevant to students and rooted in reality. Hollis also discusses how assessment tasks can be designed to encourage higher order thinking. Referring to Bloom's taxonomy, Hollis explains how assessment questions should build from the literal to inferential to evaluative, allowing for students to demonstrate a deeper level of understanding surrounding the curriculum contents. In addition, Hollis also discusses the need to design assessment tasks which are equitable and accessible to all learners, with consideration to language, layout, and instruction. Another text which provides greater insight surrounding AfL is the Centre of Educational Research and Innovation's paper titled Assessment for Learning, the Case for Formative Assessment. Although the relevance of this text may be contested due to its date of publication, the discussions surrounding the use of formative assessment to evaluate teaching are still applicable within the contemporary classroom. Within this paper, it is stated that teachers using formative assessment approaches and techniques are better prepared to meet diverse students' needs through differentiation and adaptation of teaching to raise levels of student achievement and to achieve a greater equity of student outcomes. The effective use of formative assessment can support a teacher's understanding of their students and how they learn, aligning with APTS 1. This will also support their ability to differentiate their teaching to meet the specific learning needs of students across a full range of abilities, as required by Substandard 1.5. A key takeaway from this reading is the need for teachers to implement varied approaches to assessing students' understanding, that is, to provide different types of formative assessment across the learning sequence. This will ensure that students who may not perform well in certain tasks have the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge and skills in others. This will also account for other variables and environmental factors which may impact upon a student's performance when completing a formative assessment task. By conducting multiple formative assessment tasks which vary in format, teachers can gather a greater body of student data. Furthermore, by varying the assessment tasks, students will also be given an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to transfer learning to new situations. Frey's book titled Modern Classroom Assessment provides valuable insight relating to the implementation of various forms of assessment within the classroom. Chapter 4 focuses on formative assessment. Like Hollis and William, Frey stresses the importance of creating formative assessment which is meaningful to students and allows for greater learner autonomy. Frey separates his discussion by covering both informal and formal strategies for formative assessment. Drawing upon the work of Varesian, Frey refers to informal assessment as assessment during instruction. This is where the teacher delivers instruction while continuously judging the success of that instruction. This then goes on to inform future planning. This method of assessment is designed to primarily benefit the teacher. The most efficient form of data collection during instruction is oral questioning. Frey advises that any judgments made through informal assessments should be verified by conducting more formal assessments. Evidence to support teacher judgment can be collected by assigning students homework or completing review exercises. Exploring strategies for formal formative assessment, Frey suggests the use of performance-controlled charts. These charts, or data displays, can be utilised by both teachers and students as a point of reference when reviewing their progress towards a set learning goal. Frey suggests using these charts when conducting student-teacher conferences, where work plans and strategies are discussed one-on-one to support the individual learner. A similar strategy is the process of guided interviews. Like conferences, the teacher meets individually with each student to explore their comprehension of key concepts. Time constraints within the lesson plan may be a limitation for both of these strategies. Moreover, the majority of these strategies are dependent on the level of intrinsic motivation demonstrated by the student. A classroom culture which supports the integration of AfL must be established, where students are encouraged to become active agents in their learning and development. To further explore different types of formative assessment, I viewed Maxlow and Sanzo's text titled 20 Formative Assessment Strategies That Work, a guide across content and grade levels. The chapters on select response and supply response strategies were of particular interest, providing insight as to where these formats of assessment are best applied. While select response tasks can be graded quickly with little subjectivity, there are limitations surrounding the level of understanding which can be assessed using this method. Referring back to Bloom's taxonomy, select response tasks can only assess lower order thinking, remember and understand. As stated by Maxlow and Sanzo, other means of formative or summative assessment might be required to truly know whether the student has mastered the skill. This supports CERI's statements about varying the formats of assessment tasks, providing students with multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning. Supply or constructed response tasks require students to supply information themselves, eliminating the possibility of students guessing the correct answer. In this format, students are required to demonstrate higher order thinking using reasoning to justify their responses. Supply response tasks can be utilised as a means for gauging the extent of student understanding. A limitation of supply response tasks is the additional time required to grade student responses. Furthermore, it may be difficult to determine the amount of time a student will require to complete a supply response task without prior modelling. Another effective tool for conducting AfL is the use of student portfolios. This is discussed in Bass and others' research article titled Portfolios as a Tool for AfL and Student Motivation. Are they related? This was an international study which compiled data from Dutch students attending grades 4 to 6. Due to this context, there are limitations surrounding the relevance of the research findings when applied to the context of an Australian high school. Like Williams' article, this text heavily focuses on the development of SRL. For AfL to be effective, it must engage students cognitively, metacognitively, and motivationally as active agents in their learning process. The use of portfolios as a tool for AfL allows for the meaningful collection of student work, giving detailed evidence of a student's efforts and achievements over a period of time. Portfolios allow for students to play a central role in the assessment process, which encourages ongoing self-regulation from the learner. An important consideration, which was covered across these readings, is the integration of technology to support assessment practice. To develop my understanding of how technology can be utilised to facilitate both assessment and data collection, I viewed Brookhart and Macmillan's Classroom Assessment and Educational Measurement. In this book, I focused on the contents of Chapter 12, Digital Technologies Supporting and Advancing Assessment Practices in the Classroom, by Michael Russell. Russell discusses how digital technologies can be utilised to facilitate authentic assessment. He discusses how performance tasks, which are open-ended in nature, can be digitised through the creation of simulated environments. These tasks will require students to demonstrate higher order thinking. Furthermore, digitised performance tasks can remain rooted in real-world problems, removing the challenges and risks which emerge from completing the task physically. Real-time performance data can also be collected by the teacher as students complete these digitised simulations, which can later be utilised to inform future teaching. As a soon-to-be graduate, I have already secured a teaching position to begin in early 2024. In this role, I'll be teaching subjects within the design and technology space, including junior DAT, junior and senior engineering, and design. It is within this context that I will formulate my intended future plan for formative assessment development. Based upon the knowledge that I acquired from completing this literature review, I have identified 4 significant outcomes I aim to achieve from applying this future plan. To extend my knowledge of assessment for learning, I plan to explore opportunities for further professional development. It is important that I undertake learning which is tailored to my specific subject areas, as the design and technologies classroom often presents with unique conditions and challenges. This is most prominent within the workshop environment, where a project or problem-based pedagogy is commonly employed. I will be looking for opportunities as offered by Data and their Queensland branch as planned for 2024. In previous years, Data has run online seminars and workshops which have covered the use of technologies to support assessment practice. During the Student Free Week, I will be undertaking a professional development session which explores the use of One School Class Dashboard. From this session, I hope to gain greater insight regarding the use of Class Dashboard as a repository for storing information about student achievement and development. Data generated from running formative assessments can be recorded here and shared with other staff teaching within the subject area. From completing the literature review, I am interested in employing the portfolio as a formative assessment tool within my engineering and design classes. The portfolio will be a physical journal where students can actively record their thoughts and design iteration. I have decided to use physical journals as opposed to digital journals due to the rapid hand sketching and diagramming often employed by students within these subject areas. Accommodations can be made to support individual students and their learning needs, and digital journals can be employed based upon these requirements. These portfolios will support students as they complete their summative assessment task. To ensure that the use of these portfolios is meaningful, I will routinely collect student journals once a fortnight. This will allow me time to review their documented work, provide individual feedback, and record their development. I will also conduct routine check-ins, similar to the running of student-teacher conferences. This will be a time where I can meet with students and discuss their individual progress, ensuring that they take a more active role in their learning. I must include time for this approach within my learning sequence to ensure that it is successful. Applying key knowledge gained from the literature review, I plan to explore changes that can be made to existing assessments so that they are more effective. To be effective, an assessment task must meaningfully engage all students. I will explore the context of existing assessment tasks to ensure that they are both authentic and relevant to students, reflecting real-world challenges. I plan to explore opportunities for the integration of technologies to assist both students and myself as their teacher in the assessment process. Digital modelling software will be utilised so that students can prototype their designs and run simulations. The digital file can be shared with me so that I can provide active and ongoing feedback to the student. The use of technology here will mitigate costs and waste associated with students physically prototyping their designs. It will also remove potential risks associated with physically testing prototypes. In order to make these changes to both assessment and pedagogical practice, I will require the support of my colleagues. It is important that I plan in collaboration with other staff that are teaching within these subject areas. Being a beginning teacher, there is much that I can learn from these interactions with my colleagues. Within the context of my future teaching position, I have been assigned a buddy who will support me in my teaching development. I plan to organise opportunities to observe her teaching so that I can witness her use of assessment for learning within her classroom. From these observations, I can witness how this assessment knowledge is applied by a more experienced teacher within an authentic classroom setting. From completing this literature review, I've gained a greater understanding surrounding the use of formative assessment and the need for assessment for learning within all learning environments. This supports my development related to APSD Standard 5. Assess, provide feedback and report on student learning. Primarily the substandards 5.1, Assess student learning, and 5.4, Interpret student data. Considering my ongoing development, I believe that this proficiency will be best developed through ongoing collaboration with colleagues and by observing teaching of more experienced teachers.